Thanks, Claire. This should be a very happy day for François Hollande. On May 6, a year ago, he celebrated with tens of thousands in Paris his election as president. A few days later, he waved goodbye to Nicolas Sarkozy at the Élysée Palace. But today, instead of celebrating, he called in his government for a brainstorming session at the Élysée Palace. Around the table, the ministers talked a lot about the new investment plan, about fighting unemployment, about promoting youth, etc., etc. However, the ministers all had one thing on their mind, or one number, actually. After winning the election with 51% of the votes a year ago, Hollande's popularity is now at a record low for a president after 1 year in office at 24%. Is he lost? Can he rebound? With me to discuss year one of François Hollande and how the 4 coming years will look like, we have 4 prominent guests. Anne Bagamary, who is the Europe editor with the International Herald Tribune. Hello to you. Hello. Also on the set, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who's a columnist with the Sunday Telegraph. Hello. Hello. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, who's a columnist with the Nouvel Observateur, also a communications consultant. Hello to you too. Hello. Last but not least, Christophe Robitz, who is our European Affairs editor here at France 24.
Hello.
Christophe. So elected as Mr. Normal, François Hollande is now Mr. Lonely, as the daily Libération had it on its cover page this morning. Let's take a look back at the annus horribilis of François Hollande.
From Mr. Normal to Mr. Unpopular. Never in recent times has a French president been so out of favour as François Hollande. A recent opinion poll found that only a quarter of French voters still have faith in him, a figure lower than either of his right-wing predecessors. It's now a year since Hollande came to power amid a fanfare of promises to mend France's ailing economy. But today the cheers of support have been replaced with the sound of raucous protests after a year marked with broken promises. Measures that were initially popular, such as a 75% tax hike on incomes over €1 million, have been shelved by the Constitutional Council. He's divided society over another initial popular plan to legalise gay marriage, an issue that has dominated Parliament's agenda, for some at the expense of more pressing social measures. After all, unemployment rises month on month, and in April there were more people out of work than in 1997, the previous record low. Discontent, too, over the restructuring plans of symbolic factories such as steelmaker ArcelorMittal in the east of France and car manufacturer Peugeot-Citroën. Despite a brief surge in polls due to a successful French-led intervention in Mali, his political authority was once again questioned when it emerged his budget minister had lied about his overseas accounts. And even within his own ranks, there are calls for a change of tack and a government reshuffle.
Today we have a French president who can count on the support of just 60% of his own camp. This fundamentally means that the solutions and policies that his own voters expected of him cannot be carried through.
At this important first milestone in his 5-year mandate, and with economic forecasts looking far from rosy, he now needs to urgently convince the French public that he's still the right man for the job.
The right man for the job. Anne Bagamary, could it have been worse for François Hollande?
Yeah, it probably could have been worse. He probably could have tripped on the stairs when he was going up to take his oath of office. Now, it has been a terrible year for him. Some of this could have been foretold. You don't come into an economy that's already in recession and pull it out within the first year. He made a lot of promises. He also made a lot of rookie mistakes. And those are the mistakes, I think, that are coming to haunt him now. These are things that were avoidable. For example, I mentioned the budget minister, Jérôme Cahuzac. Nobody put a gun to François Hollande's head and made him stand up and say, we're going to run the cleanest government on record. No, there will be absolutely no corruption in my government. He can't possibly promise that. He doesn't know everything that's going on inside the heads of his ministers. He made a promise he couldn't possibly keep. Expectations were very high for the economy. He was never going to be able to pull things out in a year. His predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy, couldn't do it in 5 years. It's a very similar situation to, say, Barack Obama coming in for his first term, with very high expectations that he was never, ever going to be able to fulfill. Having said that, as I said, the Hollande government has laid a lot of big avoidable mistakes. And one of them was mentioned in the reel there, concentrating on one issue, gay marriage, admittedly, seemingly an easy win and a campaign promise at the expense of things that the French people think are much, much more important.
So rookie mistakes, you agree on Elisabeth Moutet? Or do you think that maybe, as his prime minister told the French public this week, you need patience because there are reforms that have been started and you just need patience to see the results, and eventually he will see an improvement in his popularity?
Well, let's see. François Hollande arrived and he said that he was going to reverse the reforms initiated by Nicolas Sarkozy. One of them, for instance, was retirement age, which Sarkozy managed to pass from the age of 60 to 62, was immediately going to roll back to 60. And what are we hearing now? That it is actually going to go back up to 62. So that's a waste of time. That is not a reform that you've got to wait to see the results of. And it's something that's very discouraging for people. First, they are told, you know, it was supposed to be difficult. It won't be that difficult. And then they're told that it's going to be just as difficult and possibly more. So that's one flip-flop. Another one, that famous 75% tax. All these wonderful technocrats that he's got, and he's one himself, he is an ENA graduate, Sarkozy wasn't. And these people are unable to realize that when you initiate a tax, in France, the French system is that you tax a tax household. So it was, the reform was unconstitutional. Then there were other reasons. Now they said, oh, we will rear it back to 66% for individuals earning more than 1 million euros a year. Now they said that they're going to tax the companies. The companies have also been taxed. They've been hit. I had a list of all the taxes. French companies have been hit by 13 new taxes. And then they say, we need job creation. But in the meantime, people are fleeing the country, and the people who would be creating companies and keeping in the country companies that would create jobs are going away. You've got a company like PPR, which is Gucci. Gucci now, the headquarters are in Los Angeles. You've got large companies, French companies, that are slowly moving their headquarters somewhere else, and you've got lots of entrepreneurs.
All this because of François Hollande?
Because the impression is that François Hollande came in saying, I don't like the rich. You are rich when you earn more than 4,000 euros a year, and we are going to make the rich pay, and we're going to levy on high net worth individuals and on companies. We're going to tax financial transactions, tax. This is how, you know, these people do not absolutely have to stay. This is not the Soviet Union, and they left.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet.
It's 4,000 euros a month, not a year.
No, obviously. No, but...
Yes, of course, a month.
Okay. But do you agree with that criticism that, I mean, listening to Elisabeth Moutet, we have the impression of François Hollande being a hard left president. We actually hear criticism from his far left, from his left, saying, you know, he's a social democrat. He's actually spending his time cutting the debt, cutting the deficit, cutting the benefits. So it seems that there's a contradiction. Is he accused of everything?
Yeah, yes. At the same time, he's very much a center-left kind of guy. He hesitates a lot before he makes any tough decision. So it's a bit confusing for people to know where he stands, really. But when you look at his politics, you see that he has made a strong agreement with the representatives of the unions and the
bosses'
unions, and
give more flexibility to the labor market.
Yes, that's exactly. The labor market is much more flexible. He's done a great step in that direction.
It is a bit more flexible. It's not much more flexible.
Much more flexible. He has made a strong commitment to that, and he succeeded into convincing everybody around the table that it was a good measure, and everybody agrees about that, even the bosses' unions. So you could hardly say that he is on the hard left's side of politics. I mean, he is very center-left. What he does really bad is communicating. His communication is a total disaster. It's beyond belief that anybody would communicate that way in 2013.
But you know that in politics,
it's appalling.
Perception is reality. And in economics, twice as much.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think there is an economic crisis. People are fleeing from France because the market is depressed, because the economy is growing elsewhere, such as in Brazil or in other countries. But it's not François Hollande's fault. It's somebody really mean to say that. It's not true.
But is it just a communications problem? Because this is solvable in that way. Or is it just also a policy orientation problem?
You have to look at the fact that he has 4 years left. And he will use these 4 years to do his policy, to put his policy into place.
No, but it's Twitter time.
4 more years. 4 more years, he's got them.
Is cooked.
No, that's not true. He has got 4 more years. He will use them. The thing is, he communicates badly, and nobody believes in what he does because he doesn't explain what he does. He thinks that when you act, it's good. You have only to act for people to understand what you do, but that's not true. You have to tell people what you're doing. You have to do a strong storytelling. The American Vice President Dick Cheney used to say, when you don't control the media's agenda, they will destroy your presidency, and that's the truth. They will destroy your presidency.
And we've seen a lot of Hollande bashing
exactly what's happening. But
in lots of media.
Hollande bashing is Hollande's fault.
He's made no mistakes at all?
It's his own fault. Huh?
He's made no mistakes at all?
Economic mistakes, I don't see. I mean, he tries to do the right thing in the right time.
60,000 teachers who were not really necessary because there are fewer children in the French education system than there were before. 150,000 youth jobs.
But you know, as you know, the previous government has destroyed many of the jobs into the education sector. What it does is mainly to replace to put the old system into place again.
The problems of the education system existed
before
before the previous government, and they have got very little to do with staffing. And I think they've got a lot to do with the way...
I can't believe you're still attacking Hollande on that issue. I mean, that's all news. I mean,
they say, he talked about cuts.
We need to have a strong education system, otherwise there is no innovation.
Let me bring our European specialist, someone who's been seeing how François Hollande is perceived abroad and in the near abroad, I should say, the one that matters most for France, Europe. François Hollande came in as a quote-unquote European. He was very close to Jacques Delors, France's foremost European, I should say. How is he perceived across Europe? I see you're smirking already.
Well, I think his first summit was very interesting because this is a president who campaigned on the promise that he would shift the focus away from austerity to growth. And I think it's fair to say that there was a lot of curiosity among the journalists and also among his European partners because, after all, this is the second largest economy in Europe. If he really could face Germany and convince Angela Merkel that enough is enough, zu viel is zu viel, as you say in Germany, that would have meant a revolution for Europe. I think 1 year on, it's fair to say that he has so far failed to convince Merkel and a couple of leaders. He's been consistent, though. I have to say he's been consistent. He's always said, look, we have too much austerity. This is killing us. And that's precisely what the Americans are telling us. This is precisely what the IMF is now telling the Europeans. The problem is that he's facing Angela Merkel. She's the paymaster of Europe. It's the largest country. And
she's facing elections in her own country.
She's facing an election in our country.
So what you're telling us is that Hollande is right. And Merkel is wrong.
On austerity, I think a number of leaders and a great number of journalists will agree with him. The problem is that you can't talk about austerity without addressing the other side of the coin, which is reforms, structural reforms. And that's where I think he's failed largely to impress his partners. And that's the problem, because if you want Merkel to change her mind, you need to prove that you are serious about reforming the labor market, that you're serious about reforming the retirement age. And that's where I think he still comes across as a bit of a dreamer who can still sell his old socialist ideas to his partners. So I think if he manages to convince his partners that he is serious about reforming France, then he will have won the argument. That's not the case now.
And Mary, the issue of reform in France, it's always been an issue. Some are arguing that François Hollande is actually reforming quietly and that people may not realize it now. They may be unhappy because unemployment is just going through the roof. Yeah. But eventually they'll realize he'll do something that the right maybe didn't dare to do or is even supporting without saying it.
Well, a lot of people say that you could never have got even the small labor reforms that we've had in France under anything but a socialist government, because a socialist president is the only one who could sit down with the union bosses and say, look, let's reason together. I'm not going to sell you out. We do have to make progress on this. As for being the French being unhappy that when they see reforms in factories, layoffs at Peugeot, problems at ArcelorMittal, this had to happen. This was inevitable. Any president was going to have to tackle this. And if he hadn't tackled problems at Peugeot and eventually at Renault and at other French companies, we'd all say he wasn't doing his job. So a certain amount of noise, a certain amount of discomfort with change is inevitable in a business like this.
Did he tackle anything at Peugeot and Renault? Because I didn't notice him tackling anything.
Really?
And frankly, I don't think what he could have done at Peugeot and Renault. But we have a government that is sending messages such that we have this wonderfully named Minister for Industrial Production Recovery, and his job is basically...
Arnaud Montebourg.
Arnaud Montebourg is a magnificent, flamboyant former lawyer whose job basically is to kick out foreign businessmen out of France. We now have 3. He said we do not want some... Let me finish, please.
Majority of people that have voted
let me finish, please.
for François Hollande.
What I wanted to say is that, first of all, he said we do not want Mr. Lakshmi Mittal in France. We don't want people like him. Then he said about the American...
We don't want any people lying.
Can I finish?
We don't want any liars.
Could I please finish?
In charge of our companies.
I'm sorry. I would like to finish what I'm saying, and then you could say as much as you want. And I know that you will do not agree with me, and I think everybody knows it. But anyway, he kicks out. He says things that Lakshmi Mittal quite correctly, and which public opinion in England and in India sees as racist. Second, he kicks out the American company that was trying to buy up a Goodyear factory in northern France. And then he scuppers a deal between Yahoo and the French internet company Dailymotion by saying, no, you're going to devour us. You cannot have a 75%, 25% deal. We want a 50-50 deal. Now, you might say that valuing Dailymotion at $300 million is actually very, very, very low for an internet deal. But then you say the price is not right. You do not say, we don't want this, we want to keep control. The message he has sent, and the markets listen to that message, is that you cannot do business in France, and therefore people who invest and who would create jobs in France go away. And that is really...
He's only protecting our industry.
No,
I don't see what's wrong with that.
Industry.
You're only saying that he's protecting our industry. The US are protecting their industry.
He's protecting
Britain
it like Trabant was being protected.
But we shouldn't do it because it's socialist to protect its own industry.
You close the borders, you get East Germany.
If you don't want to close the borders.
Before we get to
East
Germany, I'm going to get to Anne Mary. I just want to ask you, is this the image the markets get from France? Because Arnaud Montebourg has one voice. There are other voices within the government, within his ministry, actually. That's maybe one of the problems, is that you hear one thing in the morning and the opposite the afternoon.
You know, I don't think anybody really took this Titan thing, this Goodyear thing, seriously. I really don't. The fellow who wanted to take over the Goodyear factory, was negotiated by the Goodyear factory, had a political agenda and loved to get headlines. Okay, so let's just put that aside for a minute. As far as the market reaction to what's going on in France, if you take a look at French borrowing rates, they're really quite low. France lost its AAA, but it hasn't slipped much more than that. The markets tend to be... French stocks tend not to be tanking even when they announce bad results. So I think there is still some confidence that France Inc. is functioning. What'll be interesting to see is with the competitiveness accords that Hollande agreed to with the unions, is that going to encourage small entrepreneurs to work here, to hire young people, and to give job creation a chance? I mean, and I think you have to give that a little bit of time.
Right. And tech companies should be protected from foreign investors. We have to grow them in France, and we have to develop them in our own terms. We don't have to sell them to the US because it's the good thing to sell tech companies in general to the US. I mean,
I'm not so sure I agree with you there. I think the dream of every tech entrepreneur is to sell his company to a big American giant.
Yahoo
and start something else.
Yahoo would have traded this company for anything to Google at any time. It wouldn't have been what would be the sense of it, the achievement behind it.
Then you build another one.
Companies
are not, turn around and build another one.
Companies are not only financial products. There are people behind the companies.
Okay.
There are people.
There are people behind the companies. We are going to have to take a break right now. And you'll join us after the news for the second part of our debate on year one of François Hollande's presidency.